Welcome to Module 3, Communication, Gender and Leadership, brought to you by Lauren and Madison. I'm Lauren and I will start with communication strategies. We've all experienced workplace politics and have had to navigate all sorts of people and personalities. Despite legislation and social movements to prevent sexism in the workplace, it still very much exists through language, behaviour, social expectations and workplace structures. Moving from outward or explicit sexism, it can now take the shape of gender microaggressions. These are nearly undetectable jabs and insults, enough to get the message across, but subtle enough for plausible deniability. They can be so prevalent that some aggressors may not even realise they're doing it or understand it as being received as a form of aggression. Women in leadership roles are often targets of microaggressions due to their threat to the patriarchy. Types of microaggressions can include micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations. Examples of micro-assaults can include name-calling, sexual jokes, exclusion, and intentional misnaming. Micro-invalidation is one that I see a lot, especially in the media and online. This can often take the form of not believing women's experiences, or telling her she's overreacting, or that she must have misunderstood. These are all a result of a sexist bias in our culture. This explains both the mindset of the aggressor, but also the difficulty receivers face when dealing with issues where gender is central. In their article, McKenzie and Holstead offer communication strategies to assist managing microaggressions against women by men in the workplace. These strategies require risk-taking, bravery, and acknowledging that women who are able to speak up are usually in a position where they either feel safe or have enough privilege to make a stand. Dombo and Kungel's case study into a paradox of practice in a domestic violence prevention organisation used grounded practical theory, or GPT, to explore the communication strategies that employees were using as they navigated organisational change. Domestic abuse organisations that employ empowerment philosophies to help survivors can face a paradox internally, as organisational structure, practices and policies can feel like the workers have no or limited empowerment themselves. Their findings showed two paradoxes: paradox of consistency and paradox of transparency. Employees utilise different tactics to address these in an attempt to retain their agency amid perceived disempowerment. Distinguishing between meaningful and non-meaningful work allowed team members to compartmentalise their tasks between helping survivors and other work they deemed non-meaningful. For the paradox of transparency, which showed up as different support plans for different survivors, can be interpreted as inequality by some. In response to this, staff created their own interpretations of empowerment, although this can sometimes come at the expense of survivors' own empowerment. Staff can have a negative view of survivors, believing they are liars or duplicitous in order to receive help. In addition, some staff view the system as something to be gamed as a way to allot services. The author recommended 5 actions to address some of these issues, but rebuilding of trust between staff and leadership is always difficult.
Hi, I'm Maddy. I'm going to be looking at women in the workforce. So it's looking at the readings The Battleheads Underground and Talking Power. Wanted to start us off with a question. How many women do you think are in the New Zealand government at the moment? 57 out of 123 MPs, or 46.3%, were women following the 2023 election. At a closer glance, Te Pāti Māori has 4 out of their 6 elected MPs as women, 66%, while National only has 15 out of their 49 members, making up 31%. National only has 11 more female members than the party with the fewer seats. To put it simply, it shows the continued gender bias in Aotearoa today. But gender bias isn't just in Aotearoa. Taking a step back to look at the rest of the world, we sit near the middle. However, it's important to note that almost a third of United States countries have never had a female leader. Not only is gender bias within our own country prevalent, but all over the world. So the first reading by Holmes and Mara focuses on the social and cultural context behind interactions, specifically in New Zealand. So an example of a socially constructed bias is gender workforces. Luce said in her 2017 article that many male occupations are considered the real deal, while female-dominated careers are defined as aspiring or almost there. For example, I've decided to use is the Football World Cup versus the Women's Football World Cup. creates a divide between the two, despite them being the same sport. So, looking specifically within the reading, Holmes and Mara also refer to a quote from Eberhardt's 2019 article. Everyone and anyone has bias, whether they realize it or not. Internalized biases are where the hegemonic and power dynamics come into play, particularly in the many examples of women in higher work positions feeling that shadow of judgment or uncertainty about their male co-workers. Additionally, it's interesting to note within this reading, the presence of bias is not only genders, but between cultural groups too. These examples have been examined through a social realist framework, which focuses on more communicative and socially produced answers. So the key questions raised: how do women experience power, influence, and inclusion in the workplace conversations? And which discourse feature shapes the dynamics of power and spoken interaction in these settings? The key definition, one that many think they have figured out, is the meaning of power. It's different for many and doesn't really come down to personal preference. Though gendered workforce realities see gendered behaviours and ways to dress to be a key impact on communication behaviours. As Lauren pointed out in the readings, power dressing became an internet trend a few years ago, which saw women adapting more masculine suits and ways of dress to protect the invisible norm. The real question is, who holds this power? The reading highlights the gap in leadership well. Holmes and Scrubb's 2003 article labels power as a versatile resource that's dynamically and collaboratively constructed. Gendered behaviour gets many workplaces a male-powered environment, seeing women adopt the stereotypical male gendered traits, clothes, language, gender assimilation, to hope to receive the same treatment they do. Though highlighting negative and harmful communications using the strategies Lauren touched on earlier in slide 4, they have proven the most effective in combating these so far. To conclude, how many of you feel that New Zealand has achieved gender equality?